Shall we get started?
Is it 7?
Yeah.
Woohoo!
All right. So, welcome. My name's Craig. Craig Durling. I'm the president of our running club. I think I know most of you on the call. Maybe one or two people I don't know if I've met, but welcome. And I've been running for a long time, and I wanted to do this session to kind of talk a little bit about heart rate training and how it, I think, really transformed my running. And helping me out is with the presentation is Ian. So Ian, maybe if you want to introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah, I'm the one with the little dog. I assume, are we sharing the screen right now, Craig? Otherwise, that doesn't make any sense. All right, fair enough. Ian Loughead, I'm the vice president, for those that haven't met me yet in person, of the BLT runners. And I think, as we'll find out in a few slides from now, I was probably instrumental in getting Craig excited about heart rate training. And as usual, most people at the start aren't super excited about heart rate training, but they quickly learn.
So can everyone see? I know most people are on mute, but I don't know if just Ian, can you see my screen, or you? Because you just okay. So I think we're good.
I think you're good. But can I just make one comment? How many years have I known you, Ian? How do you say your last name?
Loughead. That's Gillian Hatcher.
Okay, so I'll stop. So it's not Lougheed. Okay.
No.
Noted. Somebody put that in the notes.
H-E-E-D, not H-E-E-D.
Okay.
So just we are one of the things we're doing tonight is testing out Zoom. We're going to be having our annual general meeting in a couple of weeks using Zoom, and so we wanted to do this to see how it worked and make sure we're able to actually properly run a meeting on Zoom. So we are trying to record tonight. I think hopefully it'll work and we set it up properly so that actually happens. I think when I dialed in, it said recording. So hopefully this works. And for those who maybe weren't able to sign in tonight, they can possibly watch it back. Maybe we'll put it on YouTube or something. So let me see here if I can do this right. So I'm going to try to, oh boy, run this poll. I don't know how to do this. Maybe. See, we wanted to test to make sure we, oh, here we go. I was looking for the little menu. So the question in the poll is, have you ever tried training by heart rate in the past? So I'm going to launch a poll, see if this works, get an idea of if you can't answer the poll. Hopefully you see something pop up on your screen. It looks like it's working. Can you guys actually see the poll that I'm seeing on the screen?
Yes.
All right.
Oh,
cool.
Well, Dennis can, but I can't.
So some people have tried it. Looks like 60-40. So 60% have tried training by heart rate before, and the rest have not. So maybe you've stuck with it, maybe you haven't. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. So, I mean, I've been running for years, probably since the late 90s. And, you know, for many years, I felt like I was just kind of staying the same. You know, these are some you know, some of my performances, I guess, you know, earlier in my running career. And, you know, just for quite a few years, I was just kind of doing the same thing, doing the same kind of training, getting the same kind of results, you know, and I was always hoping that, you know, just with the accumulation of these sorts of, you know, aerobic building, you know, running, you know, doing regular running, going in races, maybe one time I would, you know, get a good night's sleep or eat the right thing for breakfast and have, you know, a PR or the race of my life. And, you know, it never really happened. And it kind of really, I think, hit me with this race in 2015. I had my sights on doing a PR in the half marathon. I really wanted to break 140, and I've been trying to do that for years, and I was doing half marathons in the 140s and the mid 140s. And I thought, well, if I go to Ottawa, it's a really flat course for the half marathon. I'll do all these things, and just kind of really hoping that I would break 140. And again, the same result. There I am crossing the finish line in the white, and it was a miserable race. I started off well. I was kind of running at the pace I wanted to, and then it all kind of fell apart. And there I go again with about a 145 finishing time. So sometime after that, I met Ian through a local running group, not the BLT runners, a group called the Timberley Tundra Pounders that had kind of been in place for a few years in this area. And Ian started to, I first kind of saw Ian posting on social media about heart rate training, and I kind of ask him a question here and there. How does this work? I was kind of curious because I was a little bit frustrated with how my running was going, and that I wasn't really getting any better. And he started to tell me a little bit about it, and I engaged with him a little bit more. And he was giving me some general direction or guidance on how to approach training by heart rate. And I started to follow the principles without really totally embracing it, but just experimenting with some of the methods a little bit. And not shortly after, I actually quite easily reached my goal in the Valley Marathon, half marathon, breaking that 140 just through a little bit of effort in this different approach to training. So I'm going to turn it over to Ian, and we're going to start to get into a little bit about like what is it, and talk about how it works.
Yeah. Okay. So normally I look at a good training plan is going to have something that I call a limiter. And a limiter is just something that sort of prevents you from hurting yourself. And so the common limiters out there are pace. Everyone is well aware of training to different paces. If you've ever trained with the running room, they have a run-walk strategy. That's a good limiter that they use. And then heart rate, of course, is the limiter that I tend to like the most. The run-walk strategy in the running room and lots of other systems use that as well. It's great. If you do happen to be running a little too fast and a little too hard, you always get that sort of reset. So that works well. Pace can absolutely be a fine limiter, but it has some intricate problems with it. First of all, you have to train to a pace that your current fitness allows, not to where you one day hope to be. So Craig training for a sub 140 half marathon when potentially he's only really physically fit enough to do a 150 half marathon at the time. You're either going to potentially overtrain, you'll get burnt out, you'll get frustrated, things aren't happening. So also, depending on whether or not you're going uphill or downhill, pace is affected by all of those things. So while it can be a good potential limiter, it can also come with its own problems. Heart rate, the really great thing there is that you are training to your fitness level, where you are at right now. Some of the things that people hate about it is that every day you go out and you're looking at that number, and you're not always running that same training pace for an easy run. Now, today I have to run slower. I don't feel good. But that is an indication of who you are right now. Things like bad sleep, and maybe you had a poor diet the day before. Maybe you're sick. Maybe it's really hot. These are all things that can affect your heart rate, and it will show up. And it's not necessarily a bad thing that it shows up, because in training, you're not trying to win the race. You're trying to get fitter while limiting the potential to get injured. We can move along there, Craig. This one's me too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, look at that. So as I said, heart rate is an indication of the effort. So you've probably all at least seen it maybe on a watch. You've all heard of it. You've heard of various systems for determining heart rate. But it's really an indication of the effort that you are giving right now. And when you start training by heart rate, you will, by running the fitness level you're at now, as opposed to running the fitness level you think you should be at, you will start to become fitter simply because you can train more often because you're getting injured less. So eventually, down the line, you will be putting in a similar effort that you are now, but you will be running faster at that same effort level. That's the idea behind it. Move along. Is that me too?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is. Look at this. I don't see the little Ian on it anymore. Originally, Craig had my name on the slides. It was all...
They're there. Maybe it's cut off on your
Yeah.
screen somehow. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's in the top left corner. I can see it.
Dang it.
It's tiny. I have my glasses on.
I'm hearing some background. Oh, there we go. All right. I'm not sure who that was, but
anyways, so how do you improve speed relative to effort? So what you really want to do is, for all intents and purposes, unless you are running very specific short distance races, such as, well, a lot of track work, oxygen is always going to be the limiting factor in what you do. So what you really want to do, and what heart rate is going to help you with, is training your body to adapt and be able to burn oxygen better. And the better it gets at adapting to that, the better it will be at burning oxygen at a higher and higher and higher intensity level. So if you spend most of your time running at this, what we call an aerobic foundation level, or underneath an aerobic threshold level, you'll be adapting your body. You'll be building capillary responses. You'll be allowing your body to fundamentally use oxygen better, which lets you run faster at that aerobic focused intensity. Then you're going to want to do, but that doesn't mean you never run hard and you never run fast. We want probably 10 to 20% of our, we have Stephanie has a question for you, Craig. We have, you do want 10 to 20% of your training to still be at that higher intensity level. And that's really pushing the boundaries. Some of it is literally above the aerobic threshold, and some of it is at sort of the maximum effort level. And we'll get into that a little bit more, I think, later on as well.
Yeah, Stephanie said that this slides are a small square on the top right of the screen. So I wonder, Stephanie, if there's a way that you might be able to change your view or something. I'm sharing it on a desktop computer, and it's my whole screen, but I don't know if maybe you're on a mobile device or something different where you might be able to change the view of what you're seeing. The screen versus.
I'm seeing it on the whole screen. Is everybody else, or is?
I have it on my screen on my cell phone, but if you scroll back through all the people that are attending, at the bottom, there's like 6 or 7 dots of the amount of people. There's like 22 people in the group. The very first screen, you can take it and rotate your phone sideways, and it's a full screen of your phone. Should be able to read it there.
Okay. And you should see it all if you're in full screen mode.
Maybe somebody I think in the chat, you can even send direct messages to people. So maybe somebody, if they're on mobile, could give Stephanie some pointers in a direct message or something. But Ian, so sorry, did you you were finished with that?
I got it. It's good.
Okay. All right. So what do you need to train by heart rate? Well, of course, you need something to measure heart rate. And so usually for most of us, I think a lot of us would be using stuff like this. You need a heart rate monitor. You need a device or some sort of a way to see what your heart rate is using that monitor in real time. And so most typically it would be, you know, a watch that's paired with a heart rate monitor, or a watch that has a heart rate monitor built into it. There are two different kinds of heart rate monitors. So we have the chest strap and we have the optical sensors, which most people, you know, would be on their watch and they'd have on their wrist. So there, you know, there are pluses and minuses to both of these. I think most experts or people that use heart rate, you know, training and these kinds of devices, especially, you know, there's different people out there that do a lot of kind of reviews and testing of these sorts of things. I think the consensus is that the chest straps tend to produce a much more reliable or accurate reading for heart rate. They the way a heart rate sensor, a chest strap is going to detect heart rate is through detecting electromagnetic signals, similar to an EKG. And there's sometimes where maybe they don't work so well. Sometimes in cold weather, you don't get as good of a connection or between the strap and your skin, where the readings can be a little bit off. But as long as you have a good moist connection, so you know, sweat usually helps. Or if you want to, some people actually put like a gel or you know, just kind of wet their strap before they use it. You know, they're pretty reliable. The optical sensors, the plus there, of course, is very convenient, much more comfortable than wearing a strap. And for a lot of people, they are actually pretty reliable. I think that the negative on the optical sensors is that sometimes they're not as responsive. So if you're doing activities where your heart rate varies, you know, goes up and down, like doing intervals, things like that, the optical sensors tend not to react as quickly. The technology is completely different than what's going on with the chest strap, where the sensor is doing the detection of electromagnetic signals. In an optical sensor, it's actually shining light into your skin, into your body, and in basically looking into your blood vessels. And based on the amount of light that reflects back into the device, it does like a prediction of what your heart rate is, and that's based on, you know, how much hemoglobin is flowing through your blood. So when your heart rate increases, there's more hemoglobin in your blood, and so that's how it kind of predicts or measures what your likely heart rate is. So it's not actually measuring heartbeats; it's doing a prediction based on you know, that light shining into your arm. There are optical sensors that people wear in their arms. I actually have one, and it tends to work better because on your wrist, a sensor is not really, you know, there's not a lot of flesh around your wrist. So you know, it's kind of a bony area, and not as much blood flow as than there would be up on your arm. So, you know, the technology actually works pretty well. The optical sensors do work well. Part of the problem with them is that they're on your wrist, which you know, isn't the greatest place to be you know, shining that light. So figuring out heart rate zones, this can be, I think, where it gets really confusing. There are a lot of conflicting or overlapping models and methods for this. First of all, if you have a GPS watch that has heart rate features on it, likely it comes with factory settings that are pre-programmed heart rate zones already there. And for some people, when they get that, maybe they just assume that those zones are appropriate for them, and you know, they may try to follow some sort of a program or you know, follow some sort of training based on what those zones are, but those zones may not be appropriate for you. Similarly, other things like treadmills or fitness machines sometimes have information like that pre-programmed into them. There's lots of different books or websites, online content that have different models. And one example of that is Orange Theory, for example, which I find, I don't really know a lot about, but, just looking at, how it's structured. They have like a 5-zone model, but the way they use it or how they promote people, getting their heart rate up and exercising in those fitness classes is quite a bit different than in the approach that you would take with heart rate training. So there's really all kinds of information all over the place, and I'm sure it can be very confusing. Another thing that you might see or be aware of is that maybe heart rate zones can be based or established based on your maximum heart rate. There's another concept called heart rate reserve. One of the maybe more common methods that people have heard of is the approach of 220 minus your age to figure out your max heart rate. That doesn't work for everyone, and I'm a great example of that. My max heart rate is nowhere near 220 minus my age. It's quite a bit higher than that. So yeah, just really, this can be very confusing, and what we're going to try to do here today is just really simplify it for everybody. So I'll turn this back to Ian to talk a little bit about a typical 5-zone model, and we'll get into a little bit more details there.
Yeah. So there are, as Craig mentioned, there's a few different models out there. Some of them go from 1 zone to 10 zones. There's some that are 4 zones. I've seen 6 zones. They're all over the place. And even within the 5-zone model that we tend to follow, there's even sometimes you'll even see zone 5 divided into 3 zones. So it goes zone 1 through 5, then 5A, 5B, and 5C. But realistically, for all intents and purposes, the simplest one that makes the most sense for us is the 5 zones. And it is what is built into the Garmin watch generally. And a lot of people use Garmin watches. I don't know what's built into Apple watches. I think Polar does use a 5-zone system as well. In this, there's the aerobics. You start your aerobic zone in zone 1, and zone 2 is where you start to max out that usable aerobic zone. So that's when you're getting up to that sort of 70 to 80% of your max. Zone 3, commonly called the junk zone, and we'll get into that in, I think, a little bit more on the next slide. And then zone 4, when we're doing intervals, when we're doing threshold work, we're starting to tap into this. So we're really pushing ourselves. So that's the maximum of zone 4 is when we start to switch from aerobic to anaerobic. And then zone 5 is really just anaerobic work. That's really short intervals. You can't spend a lot of time running in zone 5. So a really good indication that your watch numbers are off is when you finish a hard session and it says you just spent 20 minutes in zone 5. Really, the maximum time anyone can spend in zone 5 is 30, 40 seconds, like maybe a minute. Like it's not very long. It's a very short period of time. So I've often seen heart rate set up. It's a good indication that the battery needs to be changed in your heart rate monitor sometimes as well, if it starts giving you weird readings like that. And the next slide there, Craig. So here we see, again, the 5 zones, and you can really sort of tailor your training plans using the 5-zone thing based on how long you plan on running. So if you if you're doing anything that's, as we said, most of your running should always be kind of in that zone 1, zone 2 effort level. And particularly if you're doing marathon training, it really should be at the bottom end of zone 2, because you're able to run in that for a long time while using fat as a fuel source. Now, that doesn't mean you're not also using some amount of glucose and sugar as well, but your body can actually go for incredibly long periods of time if you're trained and adapted in zone 1 and zone 2. The fact that a lot of people have to do long distance training runs and gulp down a lot of sugary drinks and a lot of gels is really an indication that you're probably spending a lot of that time in zone 3. And in zone 3, the junk zone, we're really mixing. I mean, it says carbohydrates, but it's kind of a mix of carbohydrates and fat. At the low end, it's predominantly fat with a little carbohydrates, and at the top end, it's mostly carbohydrates and a little fat. It's just messy. Your body's not really getting the opportunity to learn how to pick a fuel. It's kind of grabbing from wherever it can to survive. Once you start hitting up to zone 4 and zone 5, well, zone 5 is special because you're no longer burning oxygen in the same way. But zone 4 is just pure sugar. That's potentially runs up to an hour. You might be able to run a little bit more if you're really adapted, but realistically, for a lot of people, it's that sort of, traditional sort of tempo run pace, that sort of 5K, 10K race pace. That should be in that zone 4 area.
You see, like elite half marathon, world-class runners can do half marathons in zone 4 because they're running a half marathon
in an hour. Yeah, absolutely. Personally, I can run a marathon with very, very little fuel. I think the last one I ran, I don't run them a lot, but the last one I ran was the Virtual Boston, where I drank half a liter of water and had a teaspoon of sugar. Because I was running at an easy enough effort for me that I was running in a complete fat burning zone. Really long runs, you may still require a little bit of sugar because your brain works best on glucose. And if you don't have glucose in your system, it's getting it from somewhere. So it has to turn the fat into glucose to get up there. But you can make decisions a lot better if you get a little bit of sugar just flying through. But that's really when you're in races and situations. There is a good reason to continue to fuel a little bit during long workouts, and that really comes down to being able to recover faster afterwards. All right, next slide. Potential drawbacks of heart rate training. As you can see, we've pointed out a lot of weird, complicated parts. How do you determine your heart rate? Why is my heart rate today high? Why, how do I make this work on my watch? Is it accurate? We can see that generic formulas really just don't fit how it all works together. When I run with Craig, we're both in an easy running heart rate zone, and I'm at 140 beats per minute. He's at 170 beats per minute, but that's completely normal for both of us. So one size doesn't fit all. We've got, it's hard to want to not run in that junk zone. So there's a bit of a mental thing there. The junk zone actually feels kind of good to run in because it's that kind of effort level that most of us have run in for a lot of our running, where you can feel that you're working a little bit hard. So you think, because I feel like I'm working a little bit hard, but yet I'm able to sustain this, it must mean that I'm going to get better. So it's certainly a zone we feel like we should be running in.
With the benefit of hindsight, I'll just jump in quickly.
Yeah.
I talked about the beginning, how I was doing kind of the same running for years. I think a lot of that I was running in zone 3. I've looked back. I did use a heart rate monitor for a lot of that time, but I had no idea, what that information meant or how I could use it. But when I look back now and see kind of where I was running and what my heart rate was, I think I was definitely running a lot of time in zone 3, and that's probably why I didn't really get any better.
Yeah, you do tend to, you will get better, but it's like incrementally, and it's very slow. And it also comes with the risk that because you're always kind of giving a slightly elevated effort where it feels like you're working a little bit harder, it just means that you're probably going to be a little bit tired a lot. And when you're running tired all the time, your risk of injury is going to be slightly elevated as well. The more tired we are when we run, especially long distances, the more likely our form will suffer. And when our form suffers, we do. And then finally on that slide there, in the beginning, particularly, zone 1 can be like horrifically slow. When I first started, my zone 3 average running pace was a 430 kilometer, which all of my running was done probably in that 430 to 440 range. And, now actually for me, zone 2 dropped to about a 6-minute pace. So for me, zone 1 was slower than a 6-minute pace. And frequently that meant I was trying to also walk at the top of steep hills to try and keep my heart rate down because it was so bad. So it will certainly, in the beginning, like it has the potential to feel not so great.
And I think for some people who've tried heart rate training, maybe have a hard time sticking with it for that reason, that when you get out and you're not running anywhere close to as fast as you used to, if you're following this approach and trying to train in those lower zone 1 or zone 2, it does seem very slow. And I've seen people who've maybe tried it and said, I can't do this. This is just too hard.
Yeah. It took me working on that. It was an effort, and it took a while to get my pace back. But I did get my average running pace back to that sort of 430 to 440 range. Only now my heart rate was probably about 20 beats per minute lower by doing that.
So for me, and I tell people, heart rate training was, I think, probably the only running hack there is. I mean, to hack running, it's a tall feat. Running is something that takes a lot of effort, a lot of time. We gradually, incrementally get better, and it's not easy. You have to work hard, and doing this approach, training by heart rate, I think over a very short amount of time, for me, maybe 1 to 2 years, really transformed my running and made me way faster. My performance has changed radically as compared to what I was doing before. I always say there's no such thing as good luck in a race. People always say, hey, good luck. There's no luck in a race. I mean, if you're going to do well in a race, if you're going to, do a good time or put up a good performance for you or a best performance for you, it's going to be about hard work. It's going to be about, the effort that you've put in to get ready for the race that you're doing. And there's a book by a famous running coach, Jack Daniels. So not the rum, but the running coach. Called Jack Daniels Running Formula. And in this book, he talks about 4 ingredients for success in running. And he says the biggest ingredient for success is someone's natural talent, their inherent ability. And so, people who have that have a bit of an edge. But the next most important thing, and sometimes even arguably a bigger factor in success, has to do with someone's motivation and their drive to do better. So it's certainly, I think, for a lot of us who are recreational runners, maybe some of us have taken up running, as something we do as adults, and maybe it's not something we did as our primary sport or activity growing up. It is a lot about hard work and effort, and I think training this way, you're going to get the most out of the effort that you put in and see the biggest dividends. At least I feel like I did. So, we've talked about the motto, training by heart rate zones, and what the zones are. The 5 different zones: aerobic versus anaerobic. But how do you figure out what your zones are? There's a few different ways to do this. And again, key here is that the heart rate zones for you are going to be for you specifically, and are probably going to be different than other people that you've run with, or pretty much everybody else. The gold standard for figuring out what your heart rate zones should be is something called a blood lactate threshold assessment. Ian will talk a little bit about how that works. I've gone through a few of them. Ian has gone through many, but they're not easy to do. There's a cost, and there's not a lot of places that you can do them, especially with COVID. I don't even think that's possible now. So there are some other good alternatives that we'll talk about here today as well, namely field tests, and even just using an application, a computer application, to plug in some numbers and figure out training intensities based on a recent race performance. So we'll start with blood lactate threshold assessment. Ian?
Yeah, so this is Will running, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, I think I was introduced to this whole weird concept from Jeff Zahavich, who a few years back actually gave a talk about heart rate to one of our winter sessions with BLT runners. Jeff is a kinesiologist, also a physical education teacher, and basically you run on a treadmill, starting at a quite low intensity after he's taken a baseline blood sample. So if you know how a diabetic glucose monitor works, you get a little finger prick. There's a little tiny drop of blood goes onto a little plastic sleeve that goes into a machine, and it reads your blood glucose, and it tells you whether or not you need a shot of insulin. Well, you can get the exact same monitor, but it measures the lactate in your blood. Now, there's been talk in the past about it's the increase in lactate in your blood that gives you that burning feeling that makes you want to give up. That's not quite the way it works, but there is a correlation between how lactate in your blood increases to the point where you will fail, and it correlates to how the oxygen is working in your blood as well. So in this test, you'll be running on the treadmill, and then I think it's every 3 minutes. Yeah. Jeff would prick your finger, take a little sample of blood. You kind of jump off to the sides of the treadmill for a moment, and it keeps running. He measures the lactate in your blood. You get running again. He charts that with your heart rate, and then he increases the speed of the treadmill. And you do that basically. You can do it either until failure or until he gets enough data. And usually you don't actually have to do it quite to failure. In an ideal world, what you would see is a beautiful, if you can see, I don't know if you can see me. Yep. You can see a beautiful graph that goes flat, 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 and then curves right up at the very end. And that just shows that your body doesn't produce any substantial amount of buildup of lactate really until you hit anaerobic. What you really see in most runners is some weird bumps and lumps along the way, and then finally it shoots up. But you're basically starting to accumulate quite a bit quite early on. At the end of this test, Jeff normally wants to get a max heart rate just in general for you, and it correlates to a system he's developed. And he ramps the treadmill up to an insanely high slope and makes you run all out until you can't anymore, which usually only takes a few minutes. And it's in times like that where I don't know what yours maxed out at, Craig, but I think mine only maxed out at, like, I'm not even kidding, but like 178. So
Yeah, mine was in the 200s for sure, maybe
Yeah.
207 or 209.
Yeah. So the whole 220 minus your age doesn't work at all in those.
Unless I'm
So,
11.
so Jeff will use those that data to create your zones for you, and then you can use those zones for training. And if it's the very first time you've ever had that test done, it will be messy. I don't mean the blood, but the results will look messy, and ideally you would go back probably in about 6 months or so, assuming you were doing a pretty good a training regime and following your heart rate zones. And if you went back in about 6 months, you'd see a much tidier, much nicer curve on that.
So if you're really into the sciencey stuff, I mean, that might be something you want to consider if Jeff starts doing that again. I can tell you I did it a couple times. And what was really cool is to see the change, you know, once this actually started to work. But the next way to figure out where you should be training by heart rate is to do a field test. And there's a method that's recommended by Training Peaks, and you know, that seems to have a pretty good reputation for being reliable. And basically, it's running hard for 30 minutes. You know, basically at like 5K pace, and that may seem very difficult, you know, to go out and do 5K pace for 30 minutes. Maybe you run 5K in 30 minutes and that's like a PR for you. Or maybe your 5K time is 25 minutes, and to run an extra 5 minutes at that same pace may seem daunting. But the idea really is just to run as hard as you can at that kind of a pace for that amount of time, and to take the average heart rate for your last 20 minutes to determine what your anaerobic threshold is. So it can be a little bit complicated if you're wearing a heart rate strap and timing your run for 30 minutes to figure out what was my average in the last 20 minutes. Something I usually tell people to do is basically, if you can, while you're running, maybe just stop your watch and reset it and start it over again 10 minutes in. And that way your second run, you just get the average heart rate for the second part of the session. But, you know, there may be other ways that you can look deeper into the data and figure out what your heart rate is if you, you know, get into the tools online or something like that. In any case, what you do with that is you take that average. There's a little chart, and we've done this with the club a few times. We've actually run sessions where we've gone out and had people do this and plug in their numbers, bring this actually on a sheet of paper, and people plug in their numbers and do the math. And you can figure out your different zones by applying these simple mathematical formulas. So, you know, the top of your zone for the top of your anaerobic threshold in this model is basically very close to what your average heart rate is in the last 20 minutes of the field test. And you kind of go down from there. So, you know, your zone 1 is 80% of that, up to 84% of that. Your zone 2 is 85 to 89%, and so on, as you can see here. And then, of course, your zone 5 is actually above that average for your last 20 minutes. So it's, I think, a pretty reliable way. And like I said, a lot of our members, we've come out and done this, I think, have tried training by heart rate and had some success following the zones they've set through this model. But it's not easy to do this. It's a hard effort. So you need to come prepared to run hard for 30 minutes, which doesn't sound like fun. And then the last, maybe back to Ian, I guess, talking about the Jack Daniels VDOT calculator. And, Ian is actually a certified coach through Jack Daniels VDOT. So this we've both found, I think, is a very strong correlation. If instead of doing a field test or having the finger prick, this might be the simplest way to figure out where you should be running.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the 5 zones here before, and realistically, when you start to once you get established your heart rate is kind of set, and you've really gotten away from running in that junk zone for the vast majority of your runs, it really does end up fitting with Jack Daniels. Now, Jack Daniels is a pace-based system. As I mentioned before, pace can be a limiter, and it can have advantages and it can have disadvantages. But it does tend to really correlate quite well with this 5-zone system. You will sometimes see in Jack Daniels that marathon pace can kind of skirt the world of a zone 2, zone 3. That really is going to depend on how fast your marathon pace is. If you're running a marathon in under 3 hours, you can spend a little more time probably running that marathon pace closer to that zone 3 effort. But the longer you are out there running, the more it has to be down in that zone 2 effort level, or else you're just not gonna survive. Again, threshold tempo kind of runs, basically really long intervals. Anything over 5 minutes or so is you're in that zone 4, and you really need to push it up there to get the really maximum benefit out of it. And then intervals, of course, the short fun stuff between the cones on the Colt. That's your zone 5. That should either leave you just on the edge of being breathless, or depending on the workout, maybe completely breathless. So that's the cover of the Jack Daniels book, which was the only way in the past you had to get the book and you had to look at the tables in the book and you had to figure it out, and it was a bit sciencey, but really great information that he's been writing for a very long time. And recently, his team has come out with an app which you can use, and the app gives you a VDOT score, and that VDOT score will tell you both what kind of training paces you should be at. The nice thing about it is that when it gives you an easy training pace, it gives you an easy training pace that's a range, and that's really nice. So that certainly is going to take into account your 80 to 90% of your week is in that easy range. And sometimes it's super slow, and sometimes a little less super slow. But it should all basically correlate to that zone 1, zone 2 time that you spend. As you'll see, he does give a marathon pace that's separate from the easy pace, but it's usually pretty darn close to the top end of easy pace. So it kind of, again, works itself into that sort of high-end zone 2 stuff. The one downfall of using the VDOT tables is that what people tend to do is they tend to put in the time they want to finish a race in and determine their training intensities based on that. When what you really should be doing is entering the most recent race result that you have done, and that tells you your current level of fitness. And again, with heart rate training, it's all about how fit am I right now, not where do I think I will be in 2 to 3 months from now. You can, using a training system like this, you can certainly do time trial efforts, show up to things like the park run when it's around, get somebody to pace you at an intensity that's a little bit harder than you've been training at, just to sort of see if the fitness has been picking up. And you can use those kind of time trials as a de facto race to see if your fitness has increased to a point where it's worthwhile increasing your training intensities. But you really have, if you're going to use this app by yourself, you really have to be honest and kind of true to yourself so that you don't end up overtraining. Oh,
So I think this is just the same information, like you're kind of connecting the two things together here, right?
Yeah. The app will also, maybe the last race you did was a 5K, but really you have a fall half marathon that that's your goal. So how do you correlate a 5K to a half marathon? Obviously, you can't run those same sort of speeds. Well, the app is very good at that. It will kind of give you an indication of how fast you could run that half marathon if your fitness levels, if you were at the current fitness level but trained for a half marathon, which would obviously mean usually longer long runs and a slightly different system of training to get there. But it gives you an indication of what you could be looking at when training for those longer distance races. Obviously, the further apart those get. So if I went and did a mile and did it in 5 minutes, it might say, well, you know, you can do a marathon in this. Sure, the correlation is there, but obviously completely different training system, and you really should be a little bit honest with yourself, and that those two probably aren't as equal as you hope they are.
So I think we're getting close to the end here. Just to talk a little bit about like my personal experience, probably over the period of about 5 years. You know, my experience with heart rate training, number one, kind of looking at this concept that not everybody's zones are going to be the same. I am an example of somebody, you know, and I know there's other people out there like me who have a very high active heart rate and a very low resting heart rate. It's just how I'm built, you know. And I first discovered this when I used to do competitive swimming and had, you know, realized that my heart was very high, and I had some heart disease in my family, and I got a little bit worried and actually went for some investigations just as a precaution. And, you know, the cardiologist who did all these tests on me said, you know what, just some people have high heart rates. It's just whatever. There's no real explanation for it. So here's some examples of some of my max heart rates and recent runs that I've done, you know, ranging in, you know, from the high 190s to even up to a couple 2 years ago when I did the Tele10, a 207 max during that run, and that's like an hour plus, you know, effort. So anyway, you know, that's just me, but hey, I can tolerate that, right? So you know, some people have high heart rates, some people don't. Your heart rate zones are going to be all about you and customized to you. But the big thing for me really is major improvements, you know, going from almost a 1:45 half marathon in 2015 to this last July doing a half marathon time trial in 1:24, 20 minutes faster. You know, that I think is a great example. I've had a number of other similar, you know, examples. Didn't want to spend a lot of time going over all of them, but basically I've seen massive improvements. And for me, it's not really about, you know, going all out, and all of my training is, you know, really highly intense. A lot of the running that I do is actually at an easy pace. I follow, kind of back to the last slide, this kind of model of, you know, 80 to 90% of the mileage that I'll do is at a very easy pace. And I've even found as time has gone on, my easy pace and my, you know, higher end pace, that 10 to 20% of the training that I do, that pace is getting further and further apart. I feel like I've slowed down a lot more on those easy runs as I've increased the intensity on the hard efforts. And that's probably a good thing to kind of really counterbalance, you know, the hard efforts with not really over stressing or putting too much strain on the body when you're just, again, working on that aerobic base. So, you know, as I train this way, I noticed some other things, of course. My resting and active heart rate has reduced, even though I still have that really high max. When I'm doing running at easy pace, my heart rate today is way lower than it used to be, you know, 5-6 years ago. I've lost weight. I feel like I can run a lot more. Running is not daunting. It's just very routine. You know, I had a bit of a misfortune in the last couple of months with a stress fracture. But besides that, before that, I had a really long stretch of, you know, really limited setbacks due to injury. I'd maybe have these odd things here and there where something gets a little tight and maybe I have to dial back the intensity for a couple of weeks. But up to just a few months ago, I have been pretty steady in running and not had any injury issues. And of course, I think the biggest thing for me is training this way has really made me enjoy running much more. I used to do running in that kind of maybe when I was training a lot in the zone 3, and it was hard. Like I didn't really look forward to going for a run. It was like, oh man, I got to go for a run. This is going to be hard. I'd kind of go and, run as hard as I could. I was done. I was glad it was done. And then I'd take a couple days off and do it again. Now going out for an easy run, running every day, I enjoy it. I don't actually find it difficult. Ian.
Yeah. I know when I first started running, I was a competitive cyclist in my early 30s, and then I thought maybe I should just add a little bit of running as a cross training. And that was literally 1 day a week. And I would go for what I considered to be, a legitimate pace. And I would run 1 to 2 kilometers. I'd be out of breath and call it a day. So even training for my very first Blue Nose, I ran once a week, and my training plan was add a kilometer a week. I got up to 8 before I did the 10K at the Blue Nose. So, and that was about as much running as I wanted to do. So, I finally got to the point where, I was a little more invested in running because I wanted to do well at triathlons. And so now I was running those, more impressive 2 and 3 days a week. And, I got to a point where running was okay. I didn't mind doing it. I could certainly run 6-7 kilometers at a time at what I consider to be, again, a reasonable pace. But usually at the end of it, I was out of breath. I was tired. And whenever I sort of would push it longer than that for any length of time, IT bands would flare up, ankles would hurt. And really looking back, that's literally just me running faster than I was capable of running, and the body, the form failing, the body not being able to deal with it. And so I was just constantly, I didn't get super injured. I wasn't down and out for weeks on end, but it wasn't comfortable. So I had the training, the lactate test done. I said, it happened to be January. I said, you know what, I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna stick with this plan. And then the goal was the lung run. I think in April was when it was traditionally run. So all of a sudden, I mentioned that I dropped from like a 4:30 pace to a 6-minute or slower pace. But I stuck with it. I had to walk hills, as I mentioned, and I focused a lot. And when my initial tests came back, my zone 2 was 3 heartbeats. So it was really hard to stick in that. Range. My zone 3, I believe, was something like 15, was a range of 15 heartbeats. It was massive because that's all I ever ran in. So it was hard staying out of zone 3. I actually had set my watch to beep at me whenever I would get into zone 3. It beeped a lot. And then it stopped beeping a lot. I went back after 3 months and got tested. Everything kind of went down. I think I now had 8 heartbeats to work with for zone 2, and zone 3 shrunk down. After 3 months after that, everything shrunk down even more. So that was great. I've gotten to the point now where I can pretty much tell you my heart rate without looking at the watch anymore, because I stuck with it long enough, and I know what it feels like. So I can tell you exactly at the end of a park run when I'm running up the Colt, whether or not I'm at the top end of zone 4 and heading into zone 5 or not, and whether or not I can hold that for any length of time. So next slide there. Okay, so as we've mentioned before, how do you get started in this? Well, there was the VDOT app and the VDOT tables if you happen to have the book. As Craig mentioned, the field test. theoretically, there's the treadmill test. There's even a higher level test than that when they actually stick the little, they put a little mask on your face and you're breathing out, and they're measuring the CO2 output, and they can actually see how much carbohydrate you're burning while you're breathing. I don't believe anyone around here does that. So it's not, so unless you plan on leaving the province, I don't think you can have that done.
Not a good idea.
Not a good idea. Once you, how can you correlate VDOT to a heart rate if you wanted to set up your GPS? Well, realistically, if you wanted to run by pace, the best thing you can do is run slow enough in the beginning for a few months, especially your long runs. And, you know, you often hear, you should be able to run and hold a conversation. Yeah, well, maybe you can. I mean, I don't really particularly talk particularly well, even in zone 2. I can talk in zone 1, but my zone 2, I find I get out of breath when I talk and I'm running. But you should know, is it a run that I still feel comfortable after an hour when I'm running? Take a look at what that average heart rate was for that. You know, you can probably estimate that is your, you know, into your zone 2 at that point. You can probably use that. If you know that that's about 80% of your max, then you can figure out what 100% is. You could go into your watch and you could set up your zones that way. It's a reasonable way to start. It's not perfect, but it's a way to keep you a bit honest. And now, you know, the other option is get yourself a coach, and one who likes heart rate and one that can help you develop a way to do that. And likely you'd be working with them to do a field test. That would probably be a really good way to start. Or else they can probably help correlate how the VDOT tables could work.
I think a lot of basic running programs too are gonna, you know, hopefully follow something close to that 80-20 or 90-10 ratio of easy to hard effort. So I think if even following something you find on the internet that generally is organized in that way, you know, just sticking with either, you know, that heart rate that you've figured out, you know, is your zone 1, zone 2, or something running in the paces that are close to that based on the VDOT app, I think is a great start. You know, I think the biggest, if you know, to take this hour-long presentation and just to boil it down in just to a sentence or two, is just, you know, slow down. Don't train so hard. Do a lot more easy running, build that aerobic base, and kind of stick with it for a long time. And I think you'll see that it pays dividends.
Yeah, I always say try and run every running session like you're going to run tomorrow. I don't necessarily think you should run 7 days a week, but running, say 4 or 5 days a week is certainly going to pay dividends. The more frequently you run, the better at running you will become. So therefore, if you're exhausted after every run, you're not going to want to run the next day, or worse, you might run the next day and hurt yourself. So the more you can run injury-free, just the faster you'll get.
Does anyone have any questions?
I do.
Hey, it's Jillian.
It's Jillian.
How do you pronounce your name?
Gillian.
Okay.
So I have a question about applying this to trail running and ultra training that's going to be you know, I'm going to be doing a lot of elevation.
Yeah.
Is this still a good method to apply?
Yeah. So I think it's probably even more important in some respects, because you really can't. I mean, you can have a goal on your trail run, absolutely, and it can be a reasonable goal if you have enough experience. Experience as in, I know how fast I can do this kind of a terrain because I have that level of experience from the past. But usually trail running is going to be unique every time you go out. So it's not quite like running flat on the trail, on the BLT trail, I mean. So heart rate is really really essential. You're going to get spikes, but those spikes should calm down pretty quick. So if you looked at one of those slides way back when, it basically told you roughly how long you could run being in a zone, right? So, you know, they always say that there's enough built-in fuel in the human body to do multiple marathons back to back to back to back to back. But how do you do that? Well, you have to go slowly enough that your body is burning that fuel in the right way. Obviously, in this case, if you attempted to head out in zone 3, well, yeah, the first 30 minutes of the trail run might feel great. And then the rest of that 100-miler would feel horrible. Your body would stop you anyway, so that's fine. But you're going to need to be zone 1 or less, really, the whole time in anything that's really probably over 8 hours. I mean, it's going to be zone 1 or less. Now, the more time you spend training in zone 1 on the trail, and zone 1 and zone 2, the more aerobically fit you're going to be, which means that your zone 1 and zone 2 are actually just going to be a little bit faster. Right? So you don't have to really worry so much about the speed because there's too many variables on the trail. Yeah. But if you stick within that world, I mean, and most of your training runs, you don't have to run. I mean, trail running has limiters. It's got the run walk limiter, right? You're going to be running and you're going to be walking some. That's just the nature of trail running. So you're going to get those slowdowns. You're going to get your heart reset. And in a long race like a 100-miler, where you're obviously out there for more than 24 hours, you have the opportunity to completely reset too. So if you get to a point where your heart rate is slowly easing up, it could be temperature, it could be low fuel, it could be any number of things, you have the opportunity to literally just stop, walk, take it easy, take deep breaths, fuel if you need to, drink water. You're probably dehydrated. That's going to cause your heart rate to spike up too. And then once you can control it, then you can kind of attempt to go up those paces again. When you're going up a really steep hill, it's going to tell you, it's going to start to spike your heart rate if you try and run. So you're going to have to walk fast.
So Jill, we did that Kepik last person standing run in the summer in, was it August, I think, right?
Mm-hmm. I think it was
70K. Now, I don't normally do anything like that ever. You do, but I don't. And I just showed you kind of what my heart rate is. My max in the Tele 10 was 207. Even my zone 1 starts in the, I think it's like 177 or something. So for that run, I just looked it up here on Strava. My heart rate average for that Kepik run was 148. So like 30 beats lower than my zone 1.
Yeah.
And that was the average. My max was 171. So I never even came close to my zone 1 for, running 12 hours, right? In a long distance run. So, I mean, I don't know if that kind of ties into, I think it ties into what Ian's saying, like really stay, low end. I mean, if you train a lot in that zone 1 and really build your aerobic fitness, I think you probably will be able to perform and kind of stay in that real fat burning mode where you can run for a very long time and do it relatively fast.
Yeah. I think you also have to train. There's two things going to be happening here. You need to train running and you need to train walking. Yes. Because walking will set things up aerobically slightly differently. So you have to take time in your training to do both. But that means you should also be taking time in your training. Like all the top guys are going to be out there running, during the week in zone 2, which is not something you're going to be doing an awful lot of, if at all, in that ultra run. But while most of us should be training slower than we're planning on racing, you will need to be training sometimes way faster and that's only zone 2, but you'll still want to be training up in that zone 2. But that's efforts like running on the BLT trail, doing some road running, that sort of stuff. A few sessions of that a week where you're running for 45 minutes to an hour in that zone 2 is just going to help you adapt and build up more aerobic capacity, which means that your zone 1 and sub-zone 1 speed is going to be faster.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions? I see there's a couple, maybe send to a few direct messages we'll answer in the chats, but any questions that people wanted to ask in the open forum here? And there might be one for you in there too, Ian.
Okay, so
but we can, I don't know if we want to talk about them or answer them in the chat, but well, I guess we don't need to say who it was. One question to me: do you recalculate zones based on fitness and or age? Age? No, I don't think so. I mean, I think if your heart rate zones using these various methods are based on, how fast, if you do a field test, what your heart rate is running a 5K for 30 minutes at a 5K effort, your age has nothing to do with it. And again, everyone's heart rates are different. So I would recalculate from time to time. Like I think doing a field test like that every now and then, just to make sure that you're training properly, because zones do change. My experience was, I did that first blood lactate test, and my zones were, very based on a very high heart rate, high active heart rate. And then I went back, I think a year later, and did it again, and they had come way down, so I do think you should recalculate based on fitness, but not based on age. And another one was, my watch currently shows half of my easy runs time in zone 2 and half in zone 3. 2 questions. One, this would not be considered ideal. Would not be considered ideal? And is my watch accurate with my zones? I'm not even sure how this determines this. So I guess if you haven't pre-programmed your watch based on anything, if you're just basing it on what the watch is telling you out of the box, they're probably not right. I would say. I mean, maybe there's I suppose a chance that it's programmed exactly for your heart rate zones just by chance, and maybe the zones that they pre-program into the watches are based on the average population or something like that. But I'd say there's probably a pretty good chance that your zones may be different than what your watch is saying.
I think almost everyone still defaults to 220 minus your age, even though that has been proven time and time again to be not right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if I guess starting off, if your watch is telling you something in the zone information in your watch is not right to begin with, then I don't really know if the information it's telling you is very valuable. But if it was right and you're running an easy run partially in zone 2 and partially in zone 3, maybe if it's a little bit of zone 3, I'd say that's okay. But if you're doing half of your run in zone 3 and it's truly running in zone 3 for an easy run, that's probably not ideal.
Yeah, no. I mean, you'll probably find, I was probably, and Craig probably too, really overzealous, especially when you get that blood lactate test done and you literally have very specific numbers as to what is zone 2, as opposed to the field test, which gives you more broader indications, I would say. I think we're both pretty guilty to saying, oh my God, I just went one beat into zone 3 and slow her down. So, I think there's something to be said for doing that. But I think also, looking back at, I'm more concerned usually about the average heart rate at the end of my run these days. If my average heart rate is in sort of mid zone 2, I'm feeling pretty good. I know that if it's a hot day and I'm doing a course that has a really long hill, probably the top of that hill, I've I've probably nipped into zone 3 a little bit. I'm not going to care that much. But the longer you spend in that zone 3, the longer your body is trying to figure out whether or not it should sort of switch and adapt to burning carbohydrates as opposed to fat. And really, you don't need to spend a lot of time in your training burning carbohydrates as a predominant fuel source.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, can you use like, your most recent 5K race to get an approximation? As like if, nobody's done one of the sessions where you do it and you have to do the stopping of your watch and so on. Would it be beneficial to take a look at your most recent 5K race and just to get a rough idea?
Yeah, I would say it's a good start. I mean, if you have the heart rate data, it's not exactly like what I've got on the screen here, and getting that average in the last 20 minutes. But if you can look at our 5K and maybe your 5K time is close to 30 minutes or even 25 minutes, and just looking at your heart rate maybe in the last 20 minutes of that, you're probably going to get a pretty decent idea of what your lactate threshold is, and can work backwards using this table to figure out what your zone should be. So I'd say that's better than nothing.
Yeah. And I guess you have to be honest too. And that's always the trick with a field test as opposed to the paid for treadmill test. It doesn't lie because it's a scientific response. The field test is, or using a 5K race is, there's certainly a large mental part to that as well. Like, can you mentally push yourself through that? So, it's decent, and it's absolutely better than nothing. And it's a good starting spot for most people. But, you do have to be honest, with yourself when it comes to that too.
I think I remember, Ian, when you first told me about heart rate training and before I had the test, I actually used a race to try to work backwards and manually figure out what my heart rate zones were. I mean, I don't know if I did it exactly right, but to get to that part where I finally broke 140 at the Valley Half Marathon, I was at least doing it that way. So,
yeah.
That was a start for me.
I was mostly just scared because we were out on an easy run. Your heart rate was like 180. I was like, dude, slow down. Turns out you didn't have to. So,
no. Other questions? Oh, I went the wrong way here. Hold on.
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll turn my camera on so you can see me.
Hey, Scott.
Hello. So like say on a typical 1 hour long run, toward the last 20 minutes, I would say my heart rate really starts to drift up, as what I call it, is drift. So I usually just stay steady on pace. You think I should maybe dial back and slow down to keep my heart rate even? You think that's more beneficial, or think maybe staying on pace? Like, I guess what you were speaking to would be a slowing down, I would assume, right? If that breaks my heart rate down.
That's a cardiac drift or cardiac disassociation. And it's going to happen to everybody.
Exactly.
And the point, what you want is you want to be fit enough that dissociation is pushed further and further and further back.
Right.
So in order to do that, you'll have to slow down at that time when it starts to drift, or figure out, maybe you finish up at that pace you're looking at, and then you're looking, okay, next time round, this time I went out at a 5-minute pace, and that's, I drifted at 40 minutes in for my hour-long run. Okay, well, maybe I'm going to try going out and averaging a 5:15 pace. Let's see what happens. Again, one of the things with heart rate is like, maybe you were just really, really tired that day.
Right.
So you're that cardiac drift could happen a lot sooner if you were focused on pace. Maybe you're dehydrated. Maybe you're just stressed for work. Any number of things could cause your heart rate to be off. So, trying to find out what your ideal heart rate should be for an easy run, even if you don't like stick right on it, it's a good indicator. If you're going out and 10 minutes in, you're like, well, I'm trying to hold this 5-minute pace and my heart rate is just all over the map.
Right.
It's probably an indication that today is not the best of running days for you. It's not an indication that you can't run 5 minutes, kilometer. But if you try to keep running that 5 minutes per kilometer and your heart rate's drifting higher and higher and higher, you're going to get tired sooner because you can't fight City Hall.
Right.
It's going to happen. You're going to get tired sooner. And if you really want to get that hour-long run in, or that hour and a half or 2-hour-long run in, depending on what you want to do, and you're like, no, I'm going to stick to that pace, you're going to get really tired. Your form is going to suffer, and you're going to risk injury. So, when you start to see that drift happen, I certainly would consider that, at least at that point, a good time to ease back a little bit.
Yeah, I fell into that trap a lot when I was doing the run across Nova Scotia. So
Yeah.
I would actually stop and walk like my last 2 hours of my run, or my last 2K of my run, just because I was going too high.
And some of that's not that necessarily a single run was too much for you. It's a cumulative effect, right?
Yeah.
So when I say run every run like you're going to run tomorrow,
Exactly.
In the world of ultra running, even though you have maybe 15 hours in between your runs, your body eventually just starts to see it as one big long session, and it's not recovering properly. So it's also just a good indication of recovery. Following along with your heart rate, and when something's just not right, it's time to go, whoa, why is it not right today? Like, it's been right. Like, everything's been really good for the last week. Why is today so off? Sometimes it's just the day, but sometimes it's a good indication. Maybe I've got a cold. Maybe I've got the flu. So it's a valuable tool for a lot of reasons.
Great. Thanks for the feedback.
We're going to do a draw. We just found out today that I think we're going to raffle some off to the general membership, but we wanted to throw one into this session as well. So Run Nova Scotia Virtual Series is another virtual challenge put on by...
It's not Run Nova Scotia, but
it's not Run Nova Scotia. Yeah, it's a virtual series. It's by, what are they called?
It's Tim DeGuy and Stephanie, I think.
Yeah, what's the website called though?
Route 541.
Route 541.
Yeah, we gave away one of those runs, the Christmas Island run before Christmas.
So I've written down all the names of the people and put numbers by them. Does somebody have maybe a random number generator they could Google on their phone or an app or something and give me a number between 1 and 18?
I'll get you right now.
All right.
Between 1 and 18. Boom. Generate. 8 is the number.
Dennis.
Dennis
Nice. Seems to win a lot of stuff.
Hey.
So Dennis, you've won a free entry. We'll figure out how to get that to you with Tim, but congrats. And we'll keep your eye out. I think we've got 2 more that we'll do as a draw within the general membership as well.
I got one question, if you're open to listening still.
Yep. You're breaking up there, Dennis.
The new run there. Is that better? My phone better?
Maybe just a bad
I'll
internet
disconnect
connection.
my headset. Is that any better? Disconnect the headset?
Yeah, actually, a lot better.
Now I gotta turn up the volume so I can hear you guys. That better?
Yep.
Yeah. Is it Bluetooth maybe? Is that what was?
I don't know why I can't hear anybody.
We can hear you.
You asked a question, then put your headphones back in.
Okay, I'll do that. So for the last probably 2.5 months, there's Steve and Stacy and myself, we run 13 kilometers on Saturday and Sunday every weekend. And I've been keeping my heart rate average between 165 and 171. At the beginning, it was more 171 and it has come down to 165. And we keep our pace anywhere from 5:30 per kilometer to 6 per kilometer. So it seems like it's getting better, but is there something that I could keep an eye on to try to make that better over time?
I mean, I would just say, for starters, that sounds like, pretty good progress. And I know that in the past, some of your training was a lot faster than that. So maybe just what you're seeing is a good indication that, slowing down and training in a lower aerobic zone is working for you. I don't know, Ian, do you have anything to add there?
I guess, how do you feel at the end of that 13K run? And how do you feel the next day at the end of that 13K run? If you're feeling pretty good and you're trending to a lower heart rate, then, I don't think that's an unreasonable back-to-back kind of long run that you're doing. I'm a big fan of not always doing your long run as one run, but sometimes doing it as two runs on separate days. So I think that can have some big benefits, especially when you're really trying to work on heart rate. It can be quite useful. So you'll have to be honest. Like I say, you have to be honest to yourself. Does that high 160 heart rate feel pretty good? Are you chatty? Are you smiling while you're doing it? And if you are, and you're not gasping for breath and sweating buckets in the middle of winter, then you're probably in the right place.
Well, I'm warm, definitely warm.
Yeah.
But I want to bring that time, like my best time on that 13.2 is around an hour and 11. My goal this year is to try to bring that down to 1 hour.
Yeah. And there's two ways you can do that. You can either train and treat that like a race. But I assume what you mean is you would like to be able to run 13K in an hour at an easy pace.
Right.
And really that's just going to come. That's just going to happen. But by slowing it down now, certainly that's going to help. Now, another big help there is going to be occasionally running longer than that. Getting those high teens runs in, like you're training for a half marathon or so. Doing those at that low aerobic threshold is going to help. It's going to help build the capillary strength that you have, the cardio strength that you need. And it's just going to mean that when you go out and run that 13K run, the pace is going to feel pretty easy. It trends faster at that easy pace. And it sounds like you're already en route to that.
Okay.
So, good job.
Thanks.
So we're coming in on 90 minutes, so maybe we should close it out. But maybe we could take one more question if there was one, and if not, we can call it a night. Any other questions? Well, hey, thanks. I had a great turnout here. I think I counted, 18 people. So thank you for everyone for joining in. We've been kind of wanting to do this for a while and just didn't really get around to, figuring out when and how we could do it. But this Zoom thing seems to have worked pretty well. So as you see on the screen here, we've got our AGM coming up in a couple of weeks, February the 12th. All online since we can't meet in person. So we want a pizza like we normally do, but hopefully you can join us, hear a little bit about what we did in 2020 and, our annual report back to members and, all the other business that we take care of at our AGM. If you do have any other questions on this presentation, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I assume Ian as well. And I don't want to speak for you, but usually Ian's very helpful, I always find. So hopefully I'll see you back at Mun Run. I plan to be there again on Monday night. I'm cleared to start moving again, so hope to see a lot of you soon.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a good night.
Have a good night.
Thank you.